Hello, everyone. How are you guys doing? Yeah, hope everyone is going great. Welcome back on day three session, all of you guys, and thank you so much for joining up for today. Yesterday, we had a really great session, and you had been a really a nice audience, and you have been really good patience and watching and listening and being very attentive within the session itself. So, thank you so much for that. So welcome guys on day three session for today itself. Myself, Rajesh. So we are going to conduct the day three session for today itself. All right. So what is going to be in the bucket for today itself for us? Day three. This is one of the components. What we are going to talk about today would be security management, delegation, managing some of the user settings, optimization, performance, and bit of tuning as well also. Along with that one, we will be having a small demo at during the end of the session itself also. So let's get started up. So first of all, I would like to welcome all of you once again on day three session, and especially you have taken out time for the session. Thank you for that, and we wish you a great learning experience and a career success as well. So what is the plan for today? Let me just quickly brief you about that as well. So today being the day three, the plan is basically we are going to talk about two different modules. One, which is related with the manage access and security. Second, manage user environment and apps. So from that aspect, if we talk about manage access and security, we are talking about delegation. We are talking about manage security. We are talking about security features, administration, and also keeping in mind, like, so when it comes down to the user connections and user sessions, we are talking about managing the user environments, managing the apps, setting up the FS Logics profiles, what we had talked about yesterday. And also from the optimization perspective, we are going to talk about the user experience settings. And after the end of the session itself, there are going to be some labs which are supposed to be done by you guys, which is again being considered as homework labs. So I do believe everyone is doing the labs as well. So before we crack on for today's content, first of all, we would like to have a quick recap for day two session. Now, yesterday it was a day two, and yesterday we talked about the entire discussion was being done on implement an Azure virtual desktop infrastructure. As we had been talking about the services which are hosted or which are going to be hosted on Azure. So in that context, you're going to utilize most of the services from Azure. Now, starting with the discussion was a kind of a workload which is can be your a database, a web server, Active Directory, domain controller, anything it can be, a file server. Consider any kind of a workload. And also adding to that one, the Azure virtual desktop infrastructure workload as well. So any sort of a workload when you set up, when you plan onto the Azure cloud, it's not the purpose is basically is not to simply go and deploy. No, the purpose was to understand what are the key elements which helps you to set up, configure, and manage the environment. That is more important for us. So if I take a simple example of setting up a web server, it is not just a web server, it's an entire compute, it's an entire virtual machine. And each and every virtual machine has some elements. Which are those elements? Elements like storage, network, security, firewall, configuration, disks, services, load balancing or load balancers, infrastructure. So for any kind of a workload, it becomes a good amount of planning in terms of sizing, in terms of picking up the right size, series, the workload, the purpose, everything comes up. So in those cases, there are various different shared components for any given workload, for any given VM. So say, for example, in a simple VM, what are those shared components? The shared components can be your storage, your network, your resource group, your firewalls, NSGs, network security groups. NSG stands for network security group. Also from the storage perspective, storage means where exactly the disks are going to be stored, which type of the storage, managed or unmanaged. So every single dependent element has to be in place and planned, no matter which kind of an environment you're going to set up, whether it is going to be a test, a dev, UAT, prod environment for one region, multiple regions, everything has to be worked out. So into those components, one of the critical component which comes up, which defines the workload management, and that can be done with the help of setting up the networks, communication, connectivity. So various different workloads can be set it up, isolated in terms of privacy, security, management, delegation, compliance, policies, everything. So within the VNet itself, VNet stands for virtual network. So in the virtual network, what are you defining? You're defining nothing but the different subnets. These subnets are basically being referred as tiers. So yesterday we had talked about what is the significance of these tiers, putting different workloads in different tiers in different subnets. Why? Why? Because each and every subnet has its own set of firewall, which stands with NSG. NSG stands for Network Security Group, and the NSG comprises of inbound and outbound rules in which you can go and define your source, your destination, your ports, your protocols, everything it can be. So based onto those, you can set up the rules, and that becomes quite convenient and handy for us to define which traffic from which subnet to which subnet. And as we had been talking about the networks, into that one itself, we also talked about multiple networks as well. Multiple networks means multiple VNets. And if you've got multiple VNets, obviously in between you'll be having routing. Although the routing also happens within the VNet between the subnets. But if required, you can set up the routing between the VNets as well. The question is why multiple VNets? Maybe you're segregating the different workloads in different VNets. So from that perspective, you can establish the routing. And that is all being configured with the help of the set of topology. Topology means the way you structure, the way you design, the way you structure the communication, the way you route the routing. So in that situation, if you've got multiple VNets, the way you design the connectivity that can be structured with the help of topologies. Topology can be your hub and spoke, one of the most preferred and convenient and preferred as per the best practice. Reason? Everything is being centralized in terms of monitoring, visibility, troubleshooting, configuration, and with that particular topology itself, you can also customize your own routing design as well. And that can be achieved with the help of UDR. And this concept comes under service chaining. So service chaining is nothing but a concept which helps you to customize, structure your own custom route tables, which can be done easily with the concept of UDR. UDR stands for user defined route. So with that UDR, you can define the source, the destination, the next hop. So if we have that flexibility, it becomes very convenient for us to structure that which components, which traffic from where to where and through where itself. So all this configurations can be done. And one of the key components in the UDR stands with the next hop. And in the next hop, you can have a virtual appliance. A virtual appliance can be your firewall. And a good example becomes your Azure firewall. So Azure firewall has the capability of configuring these elements. Now, which elements? As we had talked about from the security aspect, one of the good solutions which has been provided from Azure is your Azure firewall. So that firewall can be placed in a specific subnet in a specific configuration, and that can be configured as a virtual appliance. So if you place that component into that structure, it becomes easy for you to filter the traffic and control the traffic as well also. Along with that one, when it comes down to the connectivity itself also, that means there are different connectivity models. You have point site to site, express route, depending on to the business use cases as well, guys. So into that context, let's say, for example, if I'm working remotely and I want to go with a client VPN solution, then nothing is better than the point to site VPN. End-to-end connectivity, you can prefer to go with the site to site. Similarly, if I talk about point to site and site to site, these are all going over the internet public, although you can establish the private connectivity, reach out to the private workloads. But why express route, dedicated, low latency, faster connectivity? But yes, a bit of costly solution as well. But when it comes down to the business, yes, the priority goes towards that, depending on the type of the connectivity which is happening, depending on the type of the function you're going to use up. So possible cases are there that you can use them. So we talked about the connectivities, we talked about the topologies, we talked about the routing, we talked about the filtering. And not only from that aspect, if by any chance, if I want to go and set up and manage the workloads, remote management, that can be done either by connecting to the RDP, SSH ports. So when we are talking about security, it was basically that what again the best practice comes in. In that case, Microsoft suggests or recommends that you can use Azure Bastion. Why? Why? Because if in case if you are publicly opening the RDP and SSH ports for Windows or Linux, it becomes a security concern. So on the other side, what is the choice? What is that other option? In that case, you can prefer to use Azure Bastion. Into the Azure Bastion itself, it uses TLS, HTTPS, port 443, and you can remotely connect to those workloads by using the same functionality over the browser. And if that is in place, and if the hub and spoke topology is also in place, that also can be leveraged into that design. So as we had been talking about the VNets and subnets, remember I had also mentioned saying that there are certain kind of a products, there are certain kind of a workloads which do require the dedicated subnets as well. So Azure Bastion also requires a separate and a dedicated subnet as well also, where exactly it has to be placed with its own specific subnet range as well also. All right. So from that aspect, we talked about networks, we talked about security, we talked about setting them up, and also the other elements. Not only that, we also moved up to another element, which was storage. Storage, guys, basically plays a very key role. Why? Why? Because the disks, the profiles, the system information, everything goes down to the storage. And when it comes down to the management, the options, the choices in which you can think about to go with the unmanaged, managed. So unmanaged, that means the customer is going to be responsible. So from that aspect itself, we talked about the other elements of storage like redundancy, performance, which type of a disk, and which type of the file storage. So talking in context of Azure Virtual Desktop, the placement to be done in different dedicated subnets for your session host, for your host pool, for your VMs, and also from the storage point of view, either of them. But as far as the profiles are being considered, recommendation goes to the file storage. Although you do have the choices of the general purpose version 2 storage, which gives you the flexibility to use different types of services within that storage, like blobs, page blob, block blob, append blob, and you can go with the queues, tables, which are quite extensively being used by the developers. And if you talk about from the admin side, you can also opt for the file share storage as well also. So SMB, by the way, SMB stands for server message block. So from those aspects, this becomes really helpful and important for us that which are the sections we have to consider. And when we were setting up and configuring the storage itself, we briefly discussed about the different redundant options in which you can make sure that the replication of the contents is being maintained within the data center, across the data centers, across the zones, within the region, across the regions. So that is basically from the SLA perspective, from the redundancy perspective. And that is something the one which helps you to set them up. All right. So from all these aspects we had discussed about these concepts. All right. So yeah, that was a quick recap basically for the day 2 session. So now we are moving down to the day 3, and thank you for being with us. So what is the plan for today? The plan for today, as mentioned earlier itself, the very first thing which we are going to talk about access and security. So what exactly we are going to cover in this one? See, this access and security is all about administration, management, delegation. If you recall into the day 1, I had clearly mentioned saying that for any kind of a workload, it becomes very important that there are two phases. There are two phases. One phase which sets up the product, which sets up the management, which sets up the delegation. And the other phase basically is the one which helps you out to set up the access, consume the same product. So here itself, we will be focusing up onto the management side, delegation side, administration side. And also, when it comes down to connect to the service, it becomes very important for us that what security measures are we going to take up. So the very first thing we are going to talk about here itself is manage access and the security. Let's talk about the delegation first of all. All right, guys. Yeah. And then we will move down to the manage user environment and app settings. And towards the end of the session, we will be having a small demo as well also. So that is how the schedule has been planned for today. So now when we talk about manage access to the Azure Virtual Desktop, see, I told you that it comes down to the management, it comes down to the delegation, it comes down to the administration. Even though if you're working on a on-prem, whether you're working onto the cloud, the management has its own significance. How? Basically, that goes and defines that who is responsible to manage what products. So let's say, for example, if I'm using Microsoft 365, if I'm using Azure, if I'm using Azure DevOps, if I'm using storage, if I'm using database, if I'm using Azure Virtual Desktop, any kind of a resource, the first and the prime factor becomes who is going to manage it. So from the management perspective, we talk about delegation, and that is nothing but RBAC. RBAC stands for role-based access control, with the help of which you can go and delegate the people to whom? To the users and the admins. So when it comes down to the delegation, Microsoft does provides you the default standard roles, and each and every role has its own scope as well. So scope is basically nothing but which defines the boundary. So say for example, if I make you the owner of a subscription, Azure subscription, I mean to say. So that subscription itself is the boundary, the scope. That means if I've set it up you as the owner for that given subscription, that means you can manage the entire subscription. So that becomes the boundary. On the other side, let's say, for example, if I set you up as the owner for a resource group, so that resource group itself, it becomes the boundary. So the scope, it does really matter. The role, it really does matter. So when it comes down to the security as well also, there are various other elements which have to be in place. RBAC being one of them. And on the other side, you also have policies, the Azure policies, which helps you in terms of achieving compliance. So the combination of RBAC, combination of the policies is really, really recommendable. So why? Because with the policies, you're achieving the compliance. So say, for example, with the Azure policies, I can restrict you that when you're configuring a resource, you can only use a specific series or a size of the storage, VM, anything. So with that, what are you restricting? That if a person is still having the privilege to deploy the VM, he can only deploy that particular size. Why? Why? Because due to the compliance reason, due to the policies in place. And on the other side, the same person is also having the privilege to deploy the VM. That means he has the admin role, delegation. So in that context, the combination of the RBAC and the policies should always be in place. So basically, the purpose was to make you understand that how this is significant. So we are going to talk about RBAC, especially for the virtual desktop, right? So we'll get some understanding that which roles are available, and depending as per the best practices, look up your team, look up to your organization, look up to your departments, and who is going to be responsible for what. So from that aspect, it becomes very, very important for us to understand this particular area itself. Why? Why? Because the people and the team and the department to whom you go and delegate, they're accountable, responsible, and this also gives you the ease of management, the ease of administration as well. So the better way we manage the delegation, the better way we can easily handle that one. And keeping in mind the appropriate role and the set of permissions which you're going to delegate them. So when it comes down to the RBAC, when it comes down to the role-based access control, depending on the type of the product you are going to give the delegation for, you do have some default roles. So those default roles are very, very helpful. If in case if you're able to achieve, if you're able to fulfill your requirement, then you can go with the default roles. Likewise, for example, global administrator, help desk administrator, user administrator. If the default roles suffices our requirement, nothing is better than that. But on the other side, if required, if tailoring, customization is required, then technically and practically, it is possible that you can create your own roles, define the scope, configure the area, define the permissions, and then you can delegate the required team and the people who are authorized, the one who are going to actually perform those activities and the responsibilities. Not only from that aspect, there are some security measures. It's always good to know about that one. Let's say, for example, if I'm using Azure Virtual Desktop, people intend to connect to the session, and that is what you usually do. So again, from the best practices, Microsoft recommends that you should enable the screen capture protection. So we are going to look up to these areas one by one. So the very first thing which comes up is RBAC for Azure Virtual Desktop. So when we talk about Azure RBAC for the virtual desktop, as mentioned earlier itself, that there are some default roles. Although there are some standard built-in roles as well. But however, Azure Virtual Desktop has additional roles that let you separate the management roles for the host pools, for the application groups, and for the workspaces. So these rules are actually being named in compliance, keeping in mind with the Azure standard rules and keeping in mind with the concept of least privilege access methodology. So when it comes down to the delegation, guys, we always follow a principle for the least privilege access. Why? Why? Because with that one, At least we can ensure that the right people, the right team, the right department is having only what exactly they need. So, in those cases, if you see the roles which are there in front of you, this can be these are basically your desktop virtualization contributor, host pool contributor, application group reader. So you'll find up some contributor roles, reader roles, owner of the services. Although you can use the other roles as well if required, or you can customize them as well also if you want. But these are some of the standard ones, depending on what exactly you are looking out for. So, say for example, if you want to delegate someone to the relevant team, the one who would be responsible to manage, to set up, to configure, and to handle the host pools, including the asset accessing the resources, host pool contributor comes up. But on the other side, if you want to delegate someone that you don't want them to make some changes, they can just view the settings, what is there, then the reader role. Apart from this one, if by any chance, if in case, if you have to customize the role, so in that case, create custom roles. So Azure gives you the flexibility to achieve that. So into that context, you can create the custom roles with the custom permissions, define the scope. The scope is basically nothing but the boundary. And then after, once it's being set it up, then after you can add the people and give them those delegations as well. So obviously, guys, in this case, the good amount of planning has to be done. Reason, as I mentioned earlier, accountability and responsibility, what we think about. So keeping those key factors based onto that one, it can be set it up. So the point is not to simply delegate. The point is basically the significance and why and to whom we are going to give those roles. All right. So to whom you are going to give them those roles? Obviously, the identities, the users, the groups, where are they residing? Remember yesterday and the day before yesterday, on the day one and day two itself, also we talked about Azure Active Directory, which is now Microsoft Intro ID itself, which falls in, right? So Azure Active Directory gives you the different types of identities, different types of users like cloud user, you have guest user, you have hybrid user. So, and you also have the groups as well. In those cases, it is practically possible that you can delegate them if and whenever required. So most likely, if in many cases you will notice that organizations they have been using the hybrid connectivity with the identity in which they're synchronizing their corporate identities to the cloud, and then after giving them the management and delegation whenever required. And that gives the customer the flexibility to still use the same set of credentials, the corporate credentials, I mean to say. All right. So whenever any kind of a role is being defined, just keeping in mind that that role assignment itself has three major components. One, the security principle. User is an example of that. Second, the role definition means what roles, what permissions. And the third element, the third component is your scope. Scope is boundary. So in context of Azure Virtual Desktop, the scopes would be your host pool, your workspace, your application groups, And if in case, let's say, for example, if I take a situation of Microsoft Azure subscription, resource groups, management group, those are also the scope into that scenario. But here itself, we are talking about in context with Azure Virtual Desktop. And as you can see that when it comes down to the delegation, Microsoft Microsoft gives you the flexibility so that you can manage it through the graphical interface. You can use PowerShell. And by the way, that reminds with the PowerShell that we quite oftenly use of automation, isn't it? Scripting. So that is also one of the other choices in which you can go with. All right. So it again depends onto the needs. It depends again onto the choices. It depends again onto the business requirement, the appropriate PowerShell modules which have to be in place, and you can manage them. So from that aspect, these three major components are very significant. So when it comes down to the planning, make sure that we can choose the right element for each and every individual component. Which components? The security principle, the role definition and permission, the custom roles or the built-in ones, and the third becomes the scope. So if required, the PowerShell becomes also one of the approaches, the way you can set them up. What are you going to achieve is exactly the same. So whether you do it from the PowerShell, whether you do it from the graphical console, the outcome is going to be the same. It again depends on to our own approach, right? So other than that, Microsoft also gives you the flexibility that we have been using one of the very popular products from Microsoft, which is Intune. So with the Intune itself also, you can manage certain configurations as well. Likewise, say for instance, if an organization is using Microsoft Intune, and for your reference, as you know that Microsoft Intune, you can secure, you can manage your virtual desktop, you can manage your virtual machines with the policies and apps, and at the scaling, and they can be once they have been enrolled in the sense registered. So Microsoft Intune supports Azure Virtual Desktop, the virtual machines. Which virtual machines? Whether it is going to be your Windows 10 Enterprise, if you're working with a hybrid Azure AD joint machines, setting up the personal remote desktops in Azure, enroll in Intune as well. Although there are different ways, the way you can enroll through the Active Directory, joining up to the AD joint by using the configuration manager, or with the help of self enrollment by using the Azure AD joint functionality. So what features? Let's say, for example, if I'm talking about Windows 10, remote lookouts, reset passwords, wiping it out. So there are many activities, the one which you can perform using the Windows Microsoft Intune as well. Not only from that aspect, it becomes very handy at times to use a functionality to protect your clients, your sessions, your host from where it's at. So in that aspect, screen capture protection is also one of the very good feature which you can enable for the Azure Virtual Desktop. Now, before we can talk about that, how exactly it can be set it up, let me just quickly give you a quick brief about that what exactly the screen capture protection is. The screen capture protection is basically one of the really good features with the help of which you can prevent sensitive information from being captured. See, now these days, basically what happens, this is again a common methodology that whatever you see on a screen is capture, you take up the screenshots, and During that particular point of time, it might be a situation that people are using some security sensitive information which is being presented, and compromised perspective, it becomes a concern. People, they connect to the session, remote sessions, remote desktops. So keeping in mind from the security aspect, this feature can be enabled. So what are you going to achieve? What is going to happen? So when you enable this feature itself, as you can see that the remote content will be automatically blocked and hidden in the screenshots and depending on the shares what you're taking up. So this screenshot protection is can be configured on your session host level, and you can enforce them onto the client as well. But from that aspect, question here comes up, which clients? So obviously the compatible clients. So like say for example, if you have got a if I'm talking from the Windows perspective, the Windows desktop clients can be used and they are being supported. And on the other side, you can also use the Mac OS client. But yes, the specific version as well. You have to make sure that those versions are also compatible. So when we talk about the screen capture protection itself, there is one more thing which you should be taking care of is basically what possible scenarios in which you are going to use or they're being supported. So these are actually being supported in two scenarios. One being the block screen capture onto the client, and the other possible scenario becomes the block screen capture on the client and the server as well. Although we do understand that it is enabling the feature to prevent the sensitive information from being captured onto the client endpoints. So one of the flexibility becomes if you enable the block screen capture onto the client side, obviously the instructions are being provided to the client to enable that feature for a remote session. So this is one use case or one possible scenario. Another possible scenario becomes when you enable on the client and the server as well. So this prevents the screen capture from the client in the remote session, but also it prevents the toolings services within that session host as well from being captured, from the screen being captured, basically. So at times it might be a situation for the organization to implement such features as well. So we actually use a combination of them, and screen protection, screen capture protection being one of the areas. Other than that, see, we can use and also use a functionality which is in a preview at the moment right now, which is your watermarking. So watermarking itself is in preview at the moment right now. So you can talk about why watermarking. See, in many cases, Microsoft also recommends that you can use some combinations. So watermarking alongside with the screen capture protection, it helps in what? It helps in preventing the sensitive information from being captured on the client endpoints. And when you enable the watermarking or a QR code, watermark appears as a part of the remote desktops. And this QR code contains a kind of a connection ID for a remote session that admin can use to trace the session. So these watermarking is being configured on a session host and it can be enforced by the remote desktop client. And by the way, when once the watermarking is being enabled on the session host, one more thing which should be considered that only the client that supports watermarking can connect to that session host. And by any chance, if in case if you're trying to connect from an unsupported client, the connection will fail and you will get an error message that is not specific. So watermarking, by the way, is only for the remote desktops only, right? And with the remote app, watermarking is not applied and the connection is allowed. So if you connect to a session host directly, now see, sometimes basically it might be a situation that you connect to the session host directly itself, not through the virtual desktop. Maybe you're using the MSTSC, RDP, or yeah, in those cases, in that situation, the watermark is not applied and the connection is allowed. So this is again one of the really good features which is being recommended that you should use in a combination with the along with the screen capture protection as well, right? Now the question here comes up that how you can enable them, how you can set them up, and from where exactly these settings can be set it up. So let me tell you, see, these settings can be defined through the group policies, guys, and for that itself, you do require a template. As you know that in the group policies, there is one section which is coming up as the administrative templates. So Microsoft provides you the administrative template, the one which you can download. If you see the name avdgpt template.cap file, you can download that one. You can search for that. And once you have that template, administrative template, you can go and install, set it up, extract. And once it's being extracted up, so whether you're using the local group policies, whether you're using the Azure, or whether you're using, sorry, Active Directory group policies, with the help of which you can go and set it up. So a small snippet which you're able to see on a screen, which shows you that once the template is in place, you can go down to that policy, local or the group policy. And if you go down and expand the remote desktop service, you'll find that template. And from there itself, you can enable these settings, whether you go with the screen capture protection and if you want to enable the watermarking as well. So this is how it can be set it up. So now at least you know that why exactly, when exactly, and how exactly it can be set it up. So for any kind of a product, it becomes very important for us to understand that what exactly that product is, why it is required, in which scenario it is going to be used, and lastly, how exactly it can be set it up. So as we have been talking about security management, so this also comes as one of the key elements. Other than that itself, there are other security features as well, right? So when it comes down to the managed security of the Azure Virtual Desktop, there are a few other settings. Now, into that security itself, let me highlight one of the areas which is being referred as conditional access policy. This reminds that yesterday I had briefed up a concept about the CAP. CAP stands for conditional access policy. So that conditional access policy is something the one which the help of which you can achieve a principle of zero trust. What is zero trust? Don't simply trust, but verify everything. And that is what the conditional access policy helps you to achieve that one. So conditional access policy is one of the features which are being provided by the premium edition of Azure Active Directory. So Azure Active Directory has got two premium editions, one, premium one, second, premium two. So you do require any of these premium edition to configure the conditional access policy. Now, what exactly the conditional access policy contains, that we are going to shortly discuss about that one as well. So how to set it up, why it is required, and how it is going to be very, very helpful in your business use case. We can discuss that as well. And what are the components with the help of which it can be comprised and how you can set them up. Along with that one, It also becomes very important for us to set it up with a multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is not new for us, isn't it, guys? So we have been using in and out, and we have been experiencing them as well also. Correct. So from that aspect, this is also one of the features which can be enforced through the policies as well. Although you can enable them individually, independently for each and every user, but going through the policies, it becomes one of the best approaches. Not only from that aspect, managing security by using Azure Security Center. So from there itself also you can achieve the compliance. And Defender also has a significant amount of contribution where itself you can manage your antivirus settings, especially for your session hosts as well, right? So as we have been talking about the conditional access policy, which is being referred as CAP. Now take a scenario, right, guys? Say for instance, you have got some freelancers, you have frontline workers, you have the branch users, you have different departments, HR, marketing, sales, IT, security, different departments. So in that context, it becomes easier and it gives you the flexibility to go with a more granular way. It's not that one policy fits for all. No, not at all. So first of all, let's try to understand each and every element, the component with the help of this particular policy is being comprised. So conditional access policy has got components which is technically being referred as signals. All right. So what are signals? Signals can be your device, user, location, which application, from which browser, from which platform. What are these? Each and every component helps you to configure this policy. And the best part of the conditional access policy is basically it analyzes the signals. Now, say for instance, I being as a user, I'm trying to connect to the Microsoft 365. I'm trying to connect to the Outlook. I'm trying to get connected to the Teams. I'm trying to connect to the SharePoint site. I'm trying to connect to the Azure subscription. So into that, what is those? Those are basically nothing but the applications, services. So if in case, if we have got a policies in place, we can define each and every element. Let's say user. In this one, you can take an example of the IT team. Second, location, from which country, geographic, from which IP we are trying to connect. Application, okay, we are trying to connect to the SharePoint. We are trying to connect to the Teams. We are trying to connect to the Azure subscription. We are trying to connect to the Microsoft 365 service. Application, all right. Device, from which platform, from which browser, whether the device is compliant or not. So certain times it might be your iOS, Android, Mac, any kind of a device platform, ensuring that whether the devices are compliant or not. So what are we going to achieve with this one? Is simple, is that we're achieving up nothing but the security. And that is where the Azure Active Directory conditional access policy helps us to analyze that one. So with the help of this policy, we can achieve the concept and the principle of zero trust. And along with that one itself, see guys, we have been using up the multi-factor authentication as well also, right? So conditional access policy gives us the flexibility that we can enforce the multi-factor authentication to be enabled for the users and also for the guest users as well. Now, guest users are also playing a very significant role. How? Just take it one practical example that your organization is trying to outsource some of your responsibilities, contractors, externals. So the people who are from the external organization, the guest, there are many possible scenarios in which the guest accounts are being used. Likewise, say for example, if I'm inviting few people from a different organization to whom we have outsourced the management of some of our services. So who are they? They are nothing but the guest. Who are they? They are the people external from the external organization. So they can be an independent individual freelancers, or they might be working with the external organization as well also. So if those guests have been added and invited, and then after, if you want to enforce the policies for them, technically and practically, it is possible. So including the multi-factor authentication as well. So time to time, it might be a situation that if required, you can enable them, you can set them up, you can configure them as well. Now the question here comes up, which approach are you going to take to set them up? As I said earlier, that you can configure the multi-factor authentication individually, or you can go with the approach of conditional access policies as well. So through the policies, you can enforce and you can plan. So as far as is being considered, Azure Virtual Desktop Service is also one of the applications. So in that case, you can enforce if the users are trying to connect to that service, and this service can be considered as one of the conditions, one of the signals within a policy. So this is how, if you configure the policies, you can include that one, and you can think about of enabling this feature. So the Windows client for the Azure Virtual Desktop integrates with the virtual desktop within your local machine, as you know that. So whenever you try to first sign in, the client prompts your username and a password, and then after the Azure Active Directory multi-factor authentication comes in, isn't it? Right. And the next time when you sign in, the client will remember your token and your application which you have been trying to connect, right? So overall, the idea is basically to protect your users so that you can make sure that the client or the device from the browser, the location from where exactly you're connecting up, it ensures only the authorized people are being using up that service. So as far as the components which are being considered, I told you, it can be users, groups, guests, uh, applications. As far as the application is being considered, guys, there are various examples of applications. I gave you them earlier. Likewise, Teams, SharePoint site, virtual desktop service. You can consider as Azure as one of the examples. All right, and then there are many more. These applications, by the way, the application which I'm talking about, these applications which are being integrated and registered with the Azure Active Directory. So Azure Active Directory has got a capability of integrating such applications. Reason why you want to register them, why you want to integrate them from the security and from the compliance perspective, so that you can have a better and a granular control in terms of accessing and managing those services and connecting those applications as well. So this is how this is quite significant, and it's again being considered that these policies should be in place, ideally itself keeping in mind the best practices. All right. So if someone say that, okay, hey, can you please define what exactly the conditional access policy is? It's nothing but it's actually a combination of if and then statements. If this, then what? If an assignment is being met, then you get an access to the controls. And these if and then statements are basically nothing but the conditions. So when you're configuring the conditions, these conditions are actually called assignments. So into assignments, you can define your users, your applications, everything. All right. And based onto that, you can configure access controls. Access control is basically the one with the help of which you can go and set up the grant and the block. See, guys, at the moment, right now, I'm conceptually talking about, but as mentioned earlier, that towards the end of the session, there will be a small demo. Into the demo itself, I'm going to show you those key elements, the what I've been talking about right now. All right. So the good thing is that we should understand those elements, and if you're able to answer them, it becomes easy and convenient to set up those policies as well. All right. And as we have been talking about the security itself, Microsoft Defender for a cloud is also contributing towards here itself. Maybe let's say, for example, the customer uh, is using the Defender for services. So probably from the Defender for cloud itself, you can manage that one. So by the way, when we are hosting the services onto the cloud, there are certain responsibilities which are being taken care of by the vendor, and there are certain responsibilities which are being taken care of by the customer. So the customer's responsibility is basically to manage the identities, manage the devices, security for the application, setting up the host OS for the session host servers, controlling the network, routing, filtering, firewall settings, deployment configuration. But as far as the control plane for the virtualization and physical host, physical networks, physical storage, physical data centers, these are all being taken care of by the vendor itself, right? So Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which comes up in different editions. You've got a basic and standard. So from there itself, you can manage your vulnerabilities, you can assess your compliance. So Defender for Cloud is also one of the very key product for apps. All right. The idea is basically to get our environment strengthened in overall security as well, also, right? So from the Defender antivirus, Microsoft Defender antivirus for the session host is also configurable right here. So if you have been using the Microsoft Defender antivirus, you can enable them for session host itself also. It works very conveniently with the virtual desktops and on a physical Windows 10 endpoints as well, right? So this Microsoft Defender for endpoint is nothing but it's a simple enterprise endpoint uh, security platform to help the business, to help the organization, to help the customers to prevent and investigate and detect and respond to the threats. Although this has the flexibility to increase the endpoint security, especially when it comes down to the virtual desktops, 10 physical endpoints. So yeah, that is how it is quite helpful to be used up, guys. So guys, with this one, at least we are coming towards the end of one of the lessons where itself we had been talking about manage access and manage securities, right? So both the lessons we have talked about here as of right now. The next part of the lesson and the next part of the topic, what is being planned, which we are going to start now, is all about FS logics. And by the way, that reminds guys, when it comes down to the FS logics itself, we talked about the profiles, we talked about the profile containers, we talked about the storage, and that was a key discussion yesterday, isn't it? So when you establish a session and imagine where exactly the user profiles are coming in, how your user profiles are being managed, how they're being cached, how they're being made available, where exactly they're being stored, where are your containers, and which service is responsible, which product is responsible to set them up as well. So FS logic is something which takes care of that one. So before moving ahead, let me just give you a quick insight about a profile. See, we do understand that what exactly the profile is, but technically speaking, if someone says that, okay, hey, can you go and define what exactly the user profile is? So the user profile is nothing but which contains your data elements about whom? About an individual, including what? Including the configuration information like desktop settings, your network connections, your application settings, your desktop shortcuts, everything, right? So the Windows, as you know, that in Windows itself, it does creates up a local profile, and that is tightly being integrated with the local operating system. But when it comes down to the remote connectivity, remote access to the service, in those cases, the roaming profile comes into the picture so that whenever the user, wherever the user is connecting from, whichever user is connecting, in those cases, it can be ensured that they can get the same profile as well, which falls under the roaming profile, right? So FS logic is something one of the key components which helps you to set up the profile components, profile containers, the storage. So what are the areas we have to talk about in the FS logics? Basically, we'll be talking about those key components, the best practices, and which are the possible supported storage solutions and storage options which we can opt for. And as we have been talking about the profiles, you also have the flexibility to use the caching functionality, the cloud cache in context of profiles. See, these things are basically to be implemented in terms of management and ensuring that any sort of a experiencing any sort of a connectivities or services unavailabilities. In that case, still the profiles can be accessed, maintained, managed, and consumed as well. So the first thing first which comes up is your FS Logic's profile container. Now, Azure Virtual Desktop Service or Microsoft recommends you to use the FS Logic's probably for what? The FS Logic's profile containers as a user profile solution. So this has been specifically been designed for the roaming profiles and remote computing environments. And the very good example is in front of us, which is your Azure Virtual Desktop. All right. So what is a normal procedure? At a normal procedure for the any kind of a user itself, at the sign in, this container, this container is basically which container I'm talking about? The profile container. This container is being dynamically attached to your environment. So the supported VHD, and the VHD is something that basically which has all these elements and your VHDX file. So during after that connectivity itself, the user profile is being immediately available, and it seems to the user as a native user profile as well, right? By the way, when it comes down to the remote user profile is nothing but the one which provides a partition between the user data and the operating system. It does allows the operating system to be replaced or changed without affecting the user data. So in a context of RDP, a remote desktop session host, and the virtual desktop VDI infrastructure itself, the operating system may be replaced. So in all these cases, the profile has a very, very significant. And from the best practices, so yeah, why? Because uh, Microsoft also recommends that, okay, from the performance, it should be low latency, OneDrive, additional folders. So why performance? Basically, the FS Logics profile containers are high performance. All right. So integrating with Azure files, that is also one of the key solutions. You can use Azure file integration with the Azure AD domain service, Azure AD domain services, right? Yeah. So there are some key benefits of using them. And by the way, if you remember, yesterday I had talked about Azure Active Directory domain service, which is nothing but the managed services, and you can use that one for the authentication. So as we have been using the Azure files, Azure file storage, so Azure files can be authenticated from the Azure AD domain service as well, right? And when it comes down to the actual implementation itself, you can easily install that one as well also if you want, and that comes up with a simple installation. All right, let's say it's a tool you can just simply download. So you can download and you can install it. It's a piece of software, but when it comes down to the licensing, you don't require any kind of a license key, and you can preferably you should always download the latest version and install it. All right. So when it comes down to the installation of the FS Logics components, right? So it includes actually three installers, all right, that are used to install the specific component, and you can go and set them up. And after the installation, you can configure profile containers before using the service. And when we're talking about the FS Logics profile containers, what has to be taken care of is all about storage. Now, where exactly the storage would be, where would be the file server, where exactly would be the file share itself. So from that aspect, Microsoft gives you the flexibility and it gives you some compatibility with multiple other choices. Likewise, you do have the storage options. So these storage options are basically being your Azure storage options solutions which are available. So you can think about the storage spaces direct, talk about Azure files, talk about Azure NetApp files. So now here itself, what is to be taken care of is the compatibility features as well and the use case. So if you see the first example, the Azure files, they're all available as a general purpose. And this comes up as a native solution from Azure itself. And the good part is that it is available in all the regions as well. As far as the redundancy is being considered, you're getting the storage LRS, ZRS, GRS, and Geo ZRS. What are these? Local redundant, zone redundant, geo redundant, geo zone redundant. Remember yesterday when had been discussing about the storage, we had also seen about the different redundant options, which ensures the replication of the content, what is storing inside the storage would be replicated within the data center, across the data centers, across the zones, across the within the region, across the regions as well. So from that aspect, these are the redundant solutions which are being supported as well, right? And also from the capacity point of view, how much space you're getting for the per share. So all of these factors are nothing but the decision factors based on which you can go and decide that which one and when to be pulled up as well. All right. So one more thing which comes up as a containers, probably see when it comes down to the setting up the profiles, you have profile container, two different types of containers. One is profile and another one is office. What is office? Office container is actually nothing but a subset of the profile container. So although all the benefits of the office container are also delivered from the profile container, there are times when it may be beneficial when you use them together. So these containers are being configured, and as you can see that it can be used to redirect your user profile, used in the cases of non-persistent virtual environments such as virtual desktops, right? And when you're using this product, the entire user profile, except for the data is excluded, right? So on the other side, the office containers is basically, or you can say is being generally being implemented with another profile solution has been designed to improve the performance of the, especially for the Microsoft Office in the case of non-persistent environment as well, right? So from that aspect, these are two different container services. You've got a profile container, office container, and there are several reasons in which you can use them together. All right, and as we have been talking, uh, the profiles probably here itself from the availability perspective, from the performance perspective, and from the optimization perspective itself, you do have the choices of cloud cache. All right, here. So what exactly the cloud cache is? Cache is nothing but it's again a feature which actually works with the profile. Why? Why? Because to provide resiliency and high availability. So this cloud cache is actually being used. It uses actually the locally mounted container to provide you periodic updates by the remote storage providers. So cloud cache is actually being designed to insulate users from the short-term and intermittent local storage issues like inner regions or close proximities. So based on that configuration, it can also be used as a part of a kind of a BCDR solution for any kind of a setup, right? When using the remote storage providers in different regions. So very, very helpful feature itself, which can be considered again from the uh, performance aspect and availability aspect. Although this cloud cache is an optional add-on to the profile containers and office containers. So how you can go and set it up and what exactly is being required. So before you can go and set up these cloud cache, you do need to install the FS logics and making sure that the people or the users are having the appropriate access. All right. And when you're setting up the cloud cache is actually creating and mounts a local container for the user profile, right? So verifying your cloud cache configuration requires, say at times after the installation or after the configuration. These configurations are all being done with the help of the registry settings. And you can see that some of those options which are available on your screen. And once this has been configured and set it up, obviously, uh, the another concern becomes that how I can go and verify them and validate them. So nothing is better than the Windows Event Viewer, right? So this Windows Event Viewer itself, it gives you the logs, and from there itself you can review them as well at any point of time. And when it comes down to the management and configuring the profile containers, so profile container is basically what is something nothing but a full remote profile solutions for any kind of a non-persistent environment, right? So there are two environments, persistent and non-persistent. So profile containers is a full remote profile solution for the non-persistent, right? Okay, so and once you can set it up, how you can do that one? So you can manage it through the registry settings again, and you can enable them. All right. So see, although all these elements, what we have been talking about, they're all related to the configuration process, user settings, management, configuration, setting up the profiles, setting up the caching, availability, latency, all of these aspects are being achieved and solved with these implementations, right? So guys, with this discussion, we have come down towards a small end of the another lesson in terms of profiles. So the last section, we are going to talk about the user experience settings. When we talk about the user experience settings, this is basically optimization. So when we have been using the virtual desktops, persistent virtual desktops, the operating system state is being saved, right? So there are other software layers of the virtual desktop solutions, which provide the users an easy and seamless access to their VMs, often with a single sign-on solution. So what exactly we are going to do and what we are going to talk about is basically to optimize your Windows 10, right? And to optimize your Windows 10 in a virtual desktop environment, you should be eliminating some of the background activities, all right, and process that don't benefit your virtual desktop environment. So idea is to reduce the disk space usage as well also, and to optimize the connections right here. So first thing first, which comes up as a persistent virtual desktop. Now, what exactly the persistent virtual desktop is? As you can see that, okay, it is helping you out, which saves your operating system state in between the reboots, right? And there are some several different implementations of your virtual persistent virtual desktops, traditional VMs, where the VMs has its own virtual disk files, start up normally, save the changes, all right, from the configuration perspective. And as far as the non-persistent implementation is basically based on the gold image, and the base image is read-only, right? So you got two different persistent and a non-persistent, all right? And as far as the user settings are being considered, you can manage them through the group policies. Yeah. So there are opportunities for you to refine the Windows 10 operating system, specifically when you're using the Azure Virtual Desktop environment. So there are certain recommendations which, with the help of which you can disable the functionality that you prefer to use, all right? So creating the image first of all, and then installing that reference image, either on the physical or the virtual, and then after you can customize them, these user settings through the policies. I'm not saying these are the best, the thumb rule. It's again the settings as per my requirement, the one which you can go and set them up if and whenever required, right? So configuring the user settings through the policies, and there are many instances in which uh, customers, they have been using the endpoint managers. So endpoint manager also gives you the flexibility to manage through the policies, right? Endpoint managers, as you know, that this is quite helpful in terms of managing the devices, registering it, enrolling the devices, setting them up itself also, right? So from that aspect, this is the one which actually integrates. So Microsoft Endpoint Manager, it integrates with your Azure Virtual Desktop. Why? So that you can manage and operate your deployments, right? And you can enroll your Azure Virtual Desktop session host virtual machines that are hybrid and registered with Azure AD with the Microsoft Intune. So what is the key benefit of using the product? As we know that Microsoft Endpoint Manager is something which simplifies the management, provides us a centralized view across both, both means physical and virtual desktops. And it also gives you the flexibility, the new areas of collaboration. So Endpoint Manager integration is generally available for your Windows 10 and enterprise desktops and enterprise multi-session support policies as well at the device level. So overall, see, this is again a product which you do require a separate subscription and a license and a delegation as well. So in most of the cases, if the customers are already having some enterprise level 365 subscriptions, they do have these services. And if not, obviously, you have to figure it out that which one would be required as well, right? So from that aspect, this is one of the really one of the key products which Microsoft again uses and recommends to opt for. All right. And then after comes up basically see sometimes it might be configuration in which you have to optimize it in terms of session timeout properties when establishing the session. So some of those timeout settings can be configured up, right? And these timeout options are basically for the RAP, set on servers, and that is being done with the help of group policies, right? And along with that one itself, see guys, we had been talking about other features in terms of optimization. Sometimes we feel that okay, when the user gets connected up, there should be certain kind of a device redirections like printers, right? So device redirection is also one of the features. You can use that one. So there are some device redirections which would be required and for which you can make some changes in the properties of your remote desktop protocol as well also, right? So whether it is basically related to the clipboards, USB redirections, why? Why? Because we want to make sure that the users are still able to use the same within the session as well. So this actually helps you out to redirect your printers, your microphones, your other peripheral devices when during the remote session. All right. So from that aspect, this is quite helpful and again being recommended. So you can set them up, but now the question here comes up whether I'm looking for audio inputs, audio outputs, microphone redirections, speaker redirections, or camera redirections. So this gives us the flexibility to use them within the remote session, and these settings can be enabled and configured as well. Now the question here comes up how. So yeah, if you have set it up, the host pool, and if you go down to the Azure, go down to the Azure Virtual Desktop, go down to the host pool, and in the host pool itself, you'll find out the RDP properties, and you can see that they have been arrow marked. So from the RDP properties, you can see them, the audio, the video, the local devices that can be enabled for the redirection. So these settings are all being configured in the RDP properties inside your host pool. All right. And not only that aspect, see, we have been using the printing, right? Printing is very, very common. We have been using them in and out. And yes, you have to give it one of the greenery as well also, right? Save papers sometimes. But yes, technically, certain times if there are certain documents which have to be printed and there is a business need, or if it's a requirement, no doubt we have to. But on the other side, you have to keep your the greenery as well, save green and save papers, save trees, right? So there is one of the features which is called universal print, right? Now, what exactly the universal print is? It's nothing but it's a modern print solution that organizations can use to manage their print infrastructure through the cloud services from Microsoft. So this is a service, the one which is running entirely on Microsoft Azure. Now, if it's running on entirely on Azure, obviously you do require a subscription for that one itself also. So there are some universal printers, there are some partners. So when it has been configured, when it has been deployed with the universal print compatible drivers, or sorry, compatible printers, it doesn't require any kind of on-premise infrastructure itself, right? But along with that one, an appropriate subscription would be required. So if we talk about the vendors, it is again nothing but a modern print solution, right, guys, which can help the organization. They can use to manage the print infrastructure through the cloud services from Microsoft, and it is entirely it's running on Azure, right? So it's again a subscription based as I said earlier. So as you can see that which subscriptions, list of subscriptions. So if you try to use the universal print, and if you don't have the subscription, probably you do get an access denied. And if you get so, it clearly says that you need to have an appropriate subscription. And on the right hand side, you can see that which list of subscriptions that include your universal print services like enterprise subscriptions, your Windows 10, if you are having the independent universal print standalone subscription as well. Also, even that works. So there are quite common universal print ready printers vendors which are available, and universal print can be deployed with the non-compatible printers as well, and that utilizes nothing but the universal print connector software as well also, right? So see, all these features where we have been talking about so far, it's all redirections, universal prints, user settings. These are all helping us in terms of optimization, right? And one more thing which comes up, which is also being referred as a start virtual machine on connect. What is this? What is a start VM on connect? So let me just spend a minute here itself. See, start VM on connect is something, the one with the help of which, or it actually lets you reduce the cost. How? It lets you reduce the cost by enabling and the users to turn on their session host only when they need them. And you can then turn off the VMs when they are not needed. So this start VM on connect, it helps us to reduce the cost. All right. And as far as is been considered from the configuration point of view itself, you can configure the start VM on connect for personal or for the pooled host pools. And this can be done easily from the Azure portal, or you can do it from the um, PowerShell as well. So right. So see, time to time the PowerShell comes up, guys, isn't it? So that area is also one of the uh, uh, expertise you can upgrade. Think about that one. If you have been using PowerShell, well, then you're on a comfortable zone. If not, step up, get into that one, because most of the automations are using the PowerShell team, isn't it? So for the personal host pools, you can start VM on Connect will only turn only an existing session host. Remember that, which has been assigned. Okay. So as you can see that the way or from where exactly it's being configured, you can simply go down to the host pool properties, and from there itself you can enable it. All right. So what exactly it happens when you enable the start VM connect? It allows the users to start the VMs from the deallocated state. Deallocated means the resources are deallocated, which itself brings down the cost of that resource. All right. So this is how exactly it has been configured up, guys, and that is how it's been set it up. So with this, we have almost talked about what exactly the plan was for today in terms of technical contents, the topics which had been planned for today itself, guys. And right now, immediately after this one itself, as I had mentioned earlier at the very beginning, that towards the end of the session, we will be having a small demo in which I'll quickly take you to the Azure portal, make you a bit familiar with some of the references what we talked about today. All right, whether it is related to the replication, whether it is related to the universal print or some of the other settings. all right, and a bit of configuration as well. Okay. So during that particular piece of demo, you can have a good insight about those views and those features and those services as well. So guys, for this one, be with me. I'll be taking with you right away to one of my trial subscriptions or the demo subscription itself and getting connected with that as well, right? So this bringing up my interface for the portal, and you will be able to see the existing subscription in few seconds, and there it comes. Here it's up. Let's see. So guys, if you're able to see the interface, this is one of my subscriptions itself, and you have the services. So first of all, let me make you walk through with the Azure Active Directory. Remember, we talked about the policies, and onto that one itself, if you see, we have different Azure AD editions, right? Here itself, which is now being referred as Microsoft Intra. I told you earlier, right? So you have, see, different editions. You've got a premium edition, premium 1, premium 2, and you also have one more, which comes up as a Microsoft Intra governance edition as well, right? So I was talking about the premium 1 and premium 2. So the conditional access policies are actually being provided and supported in these premium editions. So if I take you back to the Azure AD, there it comes. So if you see here, this is one of my tenants, and here itself, if you see the license is premium 2. And by any chance, if in case if you have been working with the Azure AD, and here under the licenses, you have got an option for the all products. And here, if you want to try the trial version, you can try as well also, right? The same. Yeah. So you can activate the premium 2 as a free trial, and you get 100 licenses for 30 days for testing. So once the premium edition is in place, then after you can simply go down to the Azure AD, and you've got one section which is being referred as security, under which you have the choice of conditional access, this one. So conditional access policy, the one which you talked about earlier, is like creating up a new policy and defining each and every element. So say, for instance, if you're defining for the frontline workers, right? Okay, you can choose your users. So whether all users, or you can pick and choose your guest as well, as I mentioned earlier, or all, you can do that. And then your applications, right? So here you can pick and choose your applications. So here itself, if you see the like, for example, if I go with the Teams, right? So you've got a Teams application. Oh, sorry, it comes up as a Microsoft 365. All right, some portals, depending on which services have been integrated and registered right here. So you'll find them here, all of them. These are very few, but Azure AD gives you the flexibility to integrate and register them as well. So pick and choose your required application, then after your device platforms, your locations, and then after you can grant the access as well, right? And here you can enable the multi-factor authentication, all right? So this is how you can do that one. And let me take you back to the Azure virtual desktop environment, for which I'll just switch to my different tenant. All right, so let's go down and let's go down to the Azure virtual desktop. See the host pool. If I go down to the host pool, you'll find up your RDP properties, right? The one which we saw and discussed. This one. Yeah. Session behaviors, device redirection, display settings, right? All that stuff. So you can manage that one and you can set them up if and whenever required. All right. And if you go down to the uh, host pool properties, this section, there itself you have an option of start VM on connect. This was the one which I shown you into the reference itself. All right. So you can easily turn them up if required. All right. Although you do have other properties, the one which can manage it, and many things you'll be able to do it from your lab itself also, right? So the lab, which is your homework lab, right? For each and every day, you have been provided a set of labs so that you can do some practice, you can do some study, you can do some learning itself also. It's really good, guys. I would really advise you that after the training, once you finish for the day session, do take out some time to finish up those labs as well. And those labs are actually being designed for your own practice as well. All right. Okay. So these are the few areas which I wanted to show to you. All right. So almost if you see that, okay, we have been discussing these topics, these contents from a pretty long period of time itself, guys. Right. So yeah, that was a part. This was a quick demo itself, basically, which you had to see that one. And as we have been approaching up towards the end of the session, guys. All right. So this was a quick demo from my side. So before we come down and end the session itself, let me very quickly recap of what exactly we talked about today. We started up with a discussion. We started with a recap of yesterday, talking about the networks, the storage, services, and connectivity, security. And today we started with the management access delegation. All right. And talking about the different roles, uh, default roles, custom roles, tailoring, isn't it? So from that aspect, that was really helpful. And also we had discussed about other security measures where itself we introduced about conditional access policies, signals, zero trust principle, antivirus defender settings to the group policies, and also talking about the user settings and optimization, universal prints, device redirections. All right. So that is how we went with, and we talked about all of these areas. All right. So guys, with that itself, basically we are almost towards the end. And by the way, just to remind you, all of you, that there are some homework labs which are supposed to be done by you itself after the end of the session. Take out your time, make yourself comfortable, and try to do these labs. At least with that one, you can get some hands-on, more learning, and gaining more confidence and exploring the product itself, right? Okay. So yeah, with that itself, we are coming up towards the end of the session itself and end of the day. So guys, we wish you good luck and have a nice day. Have a nice evening. Take care of yourself. And we're going to meet back tomorrow once again with the day 4 content. And till then, goodbye and take care of yourself. Thank you. So take care and bye bye, all of you guys. So see you all. And thank you for being here for today's session itself. Much, much appreciated up. You especially took out some time and give me the opportunity to serve you itself. So tomorrow we're going to meet back with the same time, same place, same trainer. Thank you. Cheers. And bye bye, all of you.